Well, welcome. Tonight, we're here with somebody who is not part of the government shutdown, but who continues to work for the betterment of Milford and the area. Senator Moore, why don't we start with a hello from you?
Well, I'm happy to be with you, Al. We are working in Boston at least, and the shutdown has had an impact on Massachusetts and on people across the country, really. The state legislature continues to do its job, and I think we don't have much of the really bitter partisanship that seems to have infected our nation's capital. But we've had the economy's been hurt. It costs. Somebody had decided a figure, I think, of $50 million a day just to be shut down, because we have to make certain things secure, and there are still functions that have to continue regardless of the budget situation. So it's unfortunate. I mean, certainly the deficit's a concern, and the debt needs to be dealt with, but it can't be solved overnight. We didn't get there overnight. We got there by the nation fought 2 wars basically on credit cards, and so we were borrowing for that, and that now needs to be accounted for. Those were not cheap.
But Dick, October 1st, as long as I can remember, it always came after September 30th.
Right.
There's not a surprise that the budget was coming due. So when you say solved overnight, I mean, both sides had many, many nights to plan for.
Sure. Well, to get a budget. The budget's separate from the debt, in a sense.
Well, let's take the two separate.
But
Your opinion. Should we be holding anybody hostage over paying a bill that we've already incurred?
It's ridiculous. And it's embarrassing to the nation, for us to be holding ourselves up as the best example of democracy to other countries that perhaps don't have it the way we do, and to not be able to pay our bills and be running the government. This is it's a relatively small but not insignificant a number of members of Congress who are very conservative, who come from districts that, if they even looked at a moderate or liberal member of Congress, would probably lose their seat to a more conservative Republican candidate. And they feel the safe thing for them is voting no on the budget, no on settling the debt or anything else. And it hurts people, or people that are going to be needing fuel assistance, that need other help, veterans that need their benefits. There was a time when actually the burial of servicemen that were killed in Afghanistan was being held up because they couldn't provide the services, which is an embarrassment and really is outrageous that
to me,
should happen.
Two separate issues. I already spent the money. Arguing over, and we'll talk about the budget in a minute, but arguing over should I pay my bills on time. And I'm pretty conservative in my old age, but I can't imagine I'd call Visa up and say, I know I went to dinner last week, but I don't want to pay you on time.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem
right. What some members of the House primarily, and a few members in the United States Senate, thought they would use this as leverage. The president called it extortion, and I think essentially that's what it was, or is. That the members wanted to have another bite at the health care program, Obamacare, as everybody seems to call it, including the president these days. The most conservative members want to open it up. It's been passed. It's being implemented.
But isn't this their 43rd bite at this
right.
apple?
They've tried to repeal it in the House 43 times. It's the same definition of insanity. You do the same thing over and over again
and hope for a different outcome.
Result. Yeah, and it's I think to most people it seems ridiculous. They can't understand it. They are disgusted by it. And I think the blame has been gone around with all sides, but it's primarily on the group that is really holding everybody's feet to the fire and trying to actually risk the default of the government of the United States. And if we were to do that, I've talked to a number of economists, and they're saying at least we would go back into recession and potentially get into a serious depression if that were to happen, if we were to not pay our bills.
Do you really believe that?
Well, I don't know. Economists, Harry Truman always said he'd like a one-armed economist, because they always say on this hand it was this way, and on
this hand
on the other hand it's different. But it still is. The business. If you just look at the stock markets, which have been doing generally well in the recovery, when they looked like nothing was going to happen, they went down. Now there's been talk of it, perhaps a settlement, so it shot to great heights. So the business community certainly is following, not just the local business community, the international business community. Other governments have been calling our government saying, you really got to get this settled because it's having an impact on their economies too.
I'm more worried about long term. And, there may be a silver lining when they say, okay, right now, the bulk of the international monetary holdings are in dollars. Mm-hmm. And maybe some countries will start diversifying and keeping, some euros, mm-hmm. Maybe some currency of Japan and China or more.
Yep.
But that'll make it harder for us to borrow.
Oh, it will. And it's because you deal with the exchange rates being different than ours, and the tragedy and the sad part. I heard a speech by the former Comptroller General of the United States, who monitors budgets when he was in office, and he said, the best example he can cite of what our current debt predicament is, that we have a treaty with Taiwan that if they were to be attacked by China, we would have to come to the defense of Taiwan. And in order to do that, we'd have to borrow from China to pay for our
to pay for the war.
Yeah, so which is totally ridiculous, but it basically amounts to what we'd have to do. We borrowed from China and some other countries to pay for the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and with that money comes due at some point, and it is probably one of our major national defense issues is our financial condition. That we are in a weakened situation and we need to get that back. We were not too many years ago, a decade ago, we were in a pretty good shape that way. And we've got to get back there. So we've got to start finding areas where we can cut and stick to it. And sometimes it's perhaps going to be politically difficult decisions to make, but they've got to be made, and try to make it in a fair way that's allocating the money to making sure that we still take care of the people that we really should be taking care of, that we minimize fraud and abuse and wasteful programs. And that can be done. We've been making, I think, progress at that at the state level. We can do a lot more. But it certainly is an area that we need to have a plan. Now, the problem is both the Democrats and the Republicans in the Congress know that there are some issues with the federal health program that could be smoother. But the Republican side doesn't want to fix it. They'd rather kill it. And yet there are a lot of people, as evidenced by the fact that many of the websites across the country were overwhelmed by effort to sign up. There are a lot of people that want to take advantage of this health insurance program. We've had the great success in Massachusetts with kind of the pilot test, anyway, of this. So the federal program's a lot bigger, and there's some issues that are different. But basically, the federal government recognizes that the program we did, I was involved in the Senate in the leadership way in developing it in 2006, and we made major advances and some technical corrections in 2008, 2010, and 2012, and with the 12 one being looking at how do we contain the cost of that care from going without affecting access
But Dick,
or quality.
Isn't that one of the main reasons that when you look at Obamacare falling on Massachusetts, everybody was like, okay. I mean, you saw large wallops in part of the country.
Well, and we weren't, even what we did in 2006, which was pretty significant, some of the things that were new to the country had been in effect 20 years in Massachusetts, that you couldn't deny, an insurance company could not deny coverage to somebody because of a pre-existing condition, that a company locally could not cap benefits for lifetime or annual. Those had been standard procedures here for the insurance companies, and they lived with it, and they still made money. And so it wasn't the case in most other states. So it was a new world for them. It wasn't such a new world for us because we've been progressively working toward essentially universal coverage and certainly moving to try to improve the quality of
And
care.
when I think about it, in today's day and age, you get laid off, and all of a sudden, you got to go find a new job. Because most of the people we know aren't independently wealthy, where if they got laid off from their position, they could just cash it in and go find an island.
Yep.
And you sit there and say, okay, I am a fat, old, balding man. I have diabetes. Okay, that's a pre-existing condition if I go to a new company.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to carry any exposure to you being old and fat. Okay, now what do I do?
And then it becomes very expensive if you have to do it on your own.
And realistically, today's day and age, it used to be that they put this $1 million cap. I remember when we first got our data on our phone. It reminded me of the $1 million cap. You're going to have 500 meg. Oh, God, that'll last me years, never mind a month. I mean, I can see $1 million 20 years ago. Who would have ever thought you could spend $1 million on health care on yourself?
Well, it can happen because there are a number of conditions that are very expensive to treat or to manage. Now, a big part of what we did
today, one visit, one accident can cost you 20, 30, 40
yes,
grand, and that's an acute condition. I mean, when they,
there's rehab and everything else after that.
by the time they, I broke my leg playing hockey, by the time they put the bar in, the screws, and then go back, I'm $25,000, $30,000 in.
Yeah, and what the emphasis of our most recent bill, the cost containment bill, is to really push prevention and wellness programs. We offer a tax credit for small businesses that start a wellness program. We actually, at the Department of Public Health, draft a model wellness program for small business. We are trying to make give people more access to their records so they can see it and have it explained to them, so that people can take more charge of their own care. It's kind of a common sense thing. If you don't get sick, or you don't get injured, health care is pretty cheap for you. And so, we really need to do that now. People at our age have been probably doing things we shouldn't do and not doing things we should do.
Yeah, hello.
For a number of years, and so we've got to certainly encourage younger people to do that.
But Dick, to say we didn't have universal health care, I find misleading. If
Well, we
somebody
had-
got sick, the emergency room, Frank Saba, Phil
Well,
Shermacoli
yeah.
are not going to turn anybody away.
No, except that the hospitals, by law, were required to cover it, even if you said you couldn't.
Right, I have no money, you got to cover me.
But the physicians, especially if they weren't employed by the hospital, don't get any money from that.
Right.
And so it was a burden for many physicians.
But
to do
weren't
that.
we really denying people prophylactic care?
Yeah, because what we were doing, what we had when we passed it in 2006, we had a number of people come forward and said they didn't have the money, they didn't have insurance, they didn't have the money to go to a doctor, they knew they didn't feel all that well.
Right.
They figured, well, we'll wait till it's a crisis.
Wait till it's full-blown pneumonia,
and then
then
go
I'll
to the
go.
emergency department and get them to pay for it. But by having the insurance and the coverage, you can go to a doctor, you can go to one of the minute clinics, to a nurse practitioner, you can do a number of different things to have your health issues addressed before they become serious. And so it's better cost-wise and better
Even
health-wise.
normal occurrences, you get pregnant. God forbid you got laid off if you were pregnant.
Well,
if you
that's
could-
not our particular issue.
It wouldn't be an issue for us,
but it's-
but
but it
you
is
think
true,
if you're in
yeah.
a state, well, pregnancy, you came pregnant. That's a pre-existing condition.
Yeah.
And if you didn't have, prenatal care and all, you could go into some issues that, and it's hard to think of a
could
baby
be-
as dollars and cents,
and it
but
could be very expensive for itself, and it could create the situation where the child might have some serious disabilities that will be cost
And
money.
it kills you when you
anguish
sit there and
stuff
say,
for
it's
life.
our kid. The disability is what's ripping me up.
Yeah.
With vitamins and some, proper care, I could have taken care of that child.
Yeah.
Never mind, it's going to cost me how much?
Well, and so that's what we're talking about is why it's hard, I think, maybe for people in our state and a lot of people to understand what this is all about down in Washington. Why people want to basically close the government down in order to not really to fix, they want to repeal the federal health law, because that doesn't make a lot of sense. From a human standpoint or a money standpoint, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And so the interesting thing in Massachusetts, in the 4 major health bills, starting with 2006, that we've passed, the state Senate, it has been unanimously passed, Republican and Democrat. Now, we don't have a lot of
Oh,
Republicans.
come on, you got 4 Republicans.
But they could, including Senator Brown, at the time when that passed, could have voted no, but they didn't. They voted for it. And in the House, initially, the first bill, only 2 Republican members from the Cape, who were pretty conservative, voted no, but everybody otherwise essentially unanimous in the House. It was a little disappointing on the cost containment bill to see, first it was still unanimous in the Senate, but there were one Democrat and 15 or 16 Republicans, mostly some of the newer ones that came in during the Tea Party era in the election in 2010, who voted no. Now, how you vote against trying to contain health costs is, unless you're one of the ones that wants to spend a lot of money on it because you're going to profit from it, I don't know why we would do that. And so there's a group within the House Republican Party that they don't trust their own Republican leadership. And people like George Peterson from Grafton, he's one of the most decent people you're ever going to meet. Why you can't trust him to tell you what's going to happen in the way of what the bills are that are coming up. They basically tried to shut down the House this August when we were in unanimous consent mode, when any member can object or doubt a quorum and everything stops in the House. Basically, they held up some local bills, so it was not an earth-shattering. It's not like the debt limit or things like that Washington's debating over. But it gave us a little taste of what, in a small way, is going on in Washington.
It feels like I'm handing you a spoon, saying go on the beach, start shoveling as quick as you can, and hold back that tide.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you say it's not working in Massachusetts?
You can't. I mean, people have tried to say it, but the facts don't back that up. Our business groups, the Mass Taxpayers Foundation, everything it put out, it had about a 1.4% increase in the spending in the budget. Now, health costs went up, but they were going up whether we passed health reform or not. In fact, I think it could be argued that what we did actually slowed the growth.
Slowed down the growth.
Costs. So there are groups that have opposed the federal health plan and said, well, ours is not working. It's bankrupting the state. It didn't. The recession made it very difficult for the state, but it made it difficult for every state. And we've come out of the recession better as a state than just about any other state. Our credit rating is AA1, which is better than I think some parts of the federal government these days. And some of our authorities are AAA in their rating, which means when you get those ratings, as you know, that means the interest charges are less on money that we borrow.
Right.
So that even though we
spending
borrow
less
for
of your
different
operating
things,
budget.
we're not giving it all to the banks. The taxpayers' money is being used for what they want.
I look at these kids, and before Massachusetts, you were one of the pioneers to get these little tiny things like a pre-existing condition knocked out. Mm-hmm. This is not, we're looking at the bottom 15% of the economic ladder here. You could be making $150,000 a year and get laid off. Mm-hmm. And, God forbid, you start looking at some of the new orphan drugs, some treatments on liposome storage disorder drugs are $160,000 a year. Yeah. MS can be $4,000 or $5,000 a month. And if you got laid off for whatever reason, the company shut down, the company moved, it'd be hard-pressed for most people I know to kind of look at disposable income and come up with $5,000 to $12,000 a month.
Now, one thing that has occurred, and we're looking at trying to figure out a way to fix it now because it's really a federal issue, and I've had calls from several people in Hopedale. I happened to go up to, Countryside. Now it used to be the...
You can't say geriatric.
Well, I used to say geriatric.
Yeah, we all did. Barry said, no, you're chasing people away.
Well, anyway, Countryside, to visit one of the people up there, and I learned that there was a Milford family who were facing a $30,000 bill that they didn't expect. And what was happening is you're admitted to a hospital, or you think you're admitted to the hospital, you have some illness or whatever. And they put you're there under observation.
It's that limbo, that not admitted but here.
Yeah, you think and your family thinks you've been admitted because you're in a bed, you're in a room, and everything else.
I'm in the hospital.
But you're not actually admitted as
Right.
an inpatient. And if you're not, and then you're discharged to rehab, Medicare doesn't cover it. So all of a sudden you've got another, in Hopedale, the 2 or 3 people that I know of that got affected, it was, I don't know, 5,000 or so, but still money they didn't plan on digging into their pocket for. But they were able to do it. But I don't know about when you get up to the double-digit kind of thing, that 30,000,
Well,
that's a
you
lot of
start
money.
looking at some of the older people that built our town, and you say they're living on $1,200-1,300 a month.
Yeah,
30,000 is not
yeah,
going to be.
No, where do you get that? If you're lucky enough to have buried some blueberry money in the backyard or something like that, maybe you can do it.
You
But
best
most
have a
people
lot
don't
of
do it.
bushes of blueberries.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's an area. Now, on the one hand, I think we should, and it's not totally the hospital's fault on this either, because what I'm told is what happens is the Medicare or sometimes the insurance companies that have usually the supplemental policies will retroactively say that's observation, not you weren't really admitted. And so the payers, whether government or private, seem to be part of this issue. And if we tell people up front, which I think we should, that that your rehab isn't necessarily going to be covered because of how you're currently categorized, then some of them will say, well, then I don't want to go to rehab. The hospital doesn't need, they don't need acute care hospitalization, and it may not be safe for them to go home because they may not be strong enough and able to take
Or have
care of
somebody
themselves.
that can take time out of work
Yeah.
to sit home and help them.
So it's both a financial dilemma and potentially a health dilemma for the individual affected by it. And it's something we need to address. I've talked to the regional director of Health and Human Services from the federal level who used to work at the State House about it, and they're aware of it. They haven't got the policy straightened out in Washington to figure out how to do that, because it is a balance. You're trying to control spending on the big picture, but it's not fair to try to pass off
Sure.
the federal government's shortfall on people who are in many cases retired and don't have lots of revenue to
Disposable
spend.
income just
No.
isn't there.
No, so it's got to be solved, and we haven't quite done it yet. We're trying to do what we can at our
Now,
level.
I'm hearing all the economists say, if we default, it kind of feels like January with sequestration.
Yeah.
The sun will not rise. The moon will not,
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it happens and you say, well, we're a bit more resilient than that.
Well, and it's also, it's the boy who cried wolf kind of thing. It's that scenario, the sky is falling. And it doesn't, but it does have specific effects. It doesn't, if we default, I think there would be a pretty general effect, because then all of our credit, and everybody's maxed out on the credit cards and things pretty much, and so all of our personal credit would be impacted just as the federal credit is. But right now, the budget dilemma, the shutdown, has had an impact more on the financial markets to some degree, but particularly on individuals. The federal employees who got laid off or furloughed weren't getting
But
paid.
that's going to be a cash flow issue, right?
It's cash flow, but a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck.
No,
so
I agree.
It's still a problem. It's the cash flow when you have money in reserve and stuff, and you can dig into the
I
reserves.
more worry
is okay.
about the people that rely on, like Massachusetts, as you've always said, tourism is not a negligible
It's about the
factor.
third or fourth largest industry in the state.
So if I'm the guy who sells hot dogs to the tourists, I'm being facetious, but I sell T-shirts, I sell hot dogs. They didn't come because you shut down.
Well, I just heard on the radio coming over here tonight, it's not in our state, it's in California. A town which was near one of the entrances to the Yosemite. I think it
Yosemite
was,
National.
that the fires they had this summer they didn't have much tourism when they usually have their peak. They count on some tourism in the fall. Now the shutting of the parks ended that, and then winter is the dead time anyway. So there are a number of businesses that are failing. So that
These people can't make it up. I mean, I feel bad for for the federal employees. Now, I don't understand how we're guaranteeing their pay.
Oh,
I feel like saying, wait a minute, if I'm guaranteeing your pay, then come to work. You don't want to come to work? I don't know that I'm going to guarantee your
Well,
pay.
it was when I worked in the Federal Emergency Management Agency during the Clinton administration, and we had one of these government shutdowns. Some of the employees, now disasters, they're considered essential employees to go to it. But not everybody in the agency is dealing with a disaster directly. So some were considered essential employees. They had to work, but they weren't going to get paid till after the shutdown. They weren't happy because a lot of their colleagues didn't have to work and would get paid.
And would get paid. You sure?
And then the ones in that category, the non-essential employees, were saying, how come we're not essential? Don't we have a job that's of value? So neither type of employee liked the idea. So from that standpoint, it wasn't, nobody
But I laugh
benefits from
because
that.
the debt collectors at the IRS are essential. And from a business point of view, it makes sense because if I don't employ them, they're not collecting money.
Right.
It costs me more not to have them declared essential.
Yeah, and I think they could become more essential in April of each year than year round. But
Hopefully the government won't be shut down that long.
Well, assuming this deal sticks, they're talking about 3 months or so. So sometime in February, which is when you start wanting to see the individual revenue starting to come in from the income tax. But so all they are doing in this process is basically kicking the can down the road to another crisis situation. And it makes it hard, I think, for individuals and certainly for businesses to plan. It makes it hard for the government to plan, when you're going to have this kind of a seesaw or roller coaster effect. So it's not any way to run a railroad or a government. But
I could see disagreeing on the budget. I mean, I remember when our president said, $800 billion is ridiculous. Elect me and I'll fix it. Okay, it went up to 1.5 trillion. I didn't think fixing was...
Fixing wasn't, well, you got to spend money to make money, is what the old business saying.
Yeah, and here we are. I still don't see it fixed. So if I was going to argue on philosophical grounds, everybody agrees we ought to cut the deficit, but it's like, not in my backyard. You got people who really, out in the square states rely on the farm spending. So they think anything industrial ought to be cut so that you can save the farm. Where do we go? I mean, eventually, you got to stop spending, unless we want to become Greece, more than you make.
Well, that's the bottom line, really, and we need to go through the budget. We've done it at the state level. We've gone through, and we found things that we could do without.
Yeah, but you have no choice.
Well, we're forced by law to have a balanced budget. Now you can play a little bit with that, but
Well, you got your but you can't go to, I remember building up those rainy day funds and then 2 years later, gone.
Twice we've gone up to $2 billion, a little over $2 billion in rainy day, and we've had 2 recessions, and we pretty much spent
all of it.
Well, not all of it, but within a couple $100,000. So which is
statistically
not real money
irrelevant.
Then. And we've built it back up again. We're getting close to that level, and I think a strong argument can be made that we should actually build it up higher than that because we've used it, and we still had to cut spending. Now, one of the pressures that we're getting right now, because